Testing. Okay.
Hi, my name is Catherine, and I recently bought a house in the Bay Area, and I'm looking at things for myself as well as in the process that I work at. For the retrofit for the architect, I'm curious to know how long it took to retrofit the home, how much it cost, and who managed it in terms of how you do that kind of stuff. For the vehicle to grid, curious about does using the battery in the car wear down the battery if you connect to more charging cycles for use for community charging or the grid? And for the heat pumps, how do you ensure security? Can someone hack into your water heater or thermostat if that's not a problem or not? And then how do you know that contractors won't price gouge customers for those rebates? So a lot of questions. Thank you.
Maybe we go with the Graham, your question first.
I'm trying to recall, you said how long does it take? Was that the first one? The same length of time that it takes. I mean, I'm assuming this is part of a remodel project, or would this be a debt? It doesn't really add a lot of time to a remodel project, although the scope of this is fairly significant. You're basically re-skinning the outside of your home and replacing the doors and windows at a minimum. But if you're doing that anyway, it doesn't add any significant time to the process. And your second question was about cost. That depends on what you're comparing it to. Right? You can get a lot of very cheap windows. So if you're using the cheapest windows, you're going to see a bigger upcharge. But in typical projects we see 10 to 15% maybe upcharge to get to passive house from what would be a code minimum home. Higher end projects a lower increase. Again, it depends on what baseline quality you're comparing to. And your last question was who manages the project? The contractor manages the construction, but we approach this in a team, in a collaborative fashion. So during the construction process, the contractor's in charge, but we're heavily involved in observing construction and helping with resolve any issues that arise.
And you had a question about heat pump water heaters, rebate programs, and kind of controlling costs there, right?
Yeah, so the idea is that if a contractor is passing on the savings to the consumer, how do you ensure that they're not taking the rebate for themselves, or if they're adding their prices, raising the prices when the rebates come in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we always encourage customers to get a few quotes. And on the tech public reporting site, we have data on all of the heat pump water heater installations so far and the average costs. And so that's meant to give consumers a tool to understand if they're getting a reasonable quote or not. And contractors understand that this is an opportunity to shift their business model to future and current technologies. And so just being able to mark down the price to the customer to sell these new technologies helps them evolve their business model.
Great. And as far as the question about battery degradation, actually there's scientific studies that show if you keep that you're charging and discharging between 20 and 80%, and light daily discharging can actually be beneficial to the health of the battery. So the worst thing for a battery is to sit idle or to fully discharge it or fully charge it. So you keep it in that middle range and use it for, peak shaving at high peak times of use to monetize it. That's one way you can actually, so it doesn't really affect the battery health, essentially, as long as you don't totally discharge it.
And John, I'm curious. I imagine that a lot of these battery systems have some type of smart software where it can do that on its own. You don't have to monitor when it's getting 80%.
Yeah, I mean, our technology really takes a great deal of care with that, and it'll not only keep it between the range that you specify, it'll keep the driving range that you specify intact, and even minimize the rate of discharge if it's an indication of battery stress. So yes.
Great. Emily, do you have any questions online queued up?
We do. Our panelists have also been answering questions in the Q&A. So if yours isn't answered live, make sure you check that answered sort of section of the Q&A to see if you've got one. But ones that haven't been answered, for John, are there any examples of bidirectional EV charging that can work well for fleet vehicles?
Yes, actually, I did answer that in the chat, but I'll say again, there's a couple of companies that have been doing that for quite a while. One is Fermata. They have a bidirectional fleet charger that's 3-phase power, and also Nuvi. So they're both aggregators, and they've been able to make thousands of dollars for their customers by aggregating their fleets and monetizing them in this way. Because fleets come back at the end of the day, they're parked pretty much at peak time of use. So it's a perfect time to discharge and monetize your vehicle in that way. And yeah, absolutely. And
Great.
city, it's a real opportunity for cities to electrify their fleet, monetize it, and then have that fleet for community resilience as well.
And Graham, can you talk about savings from energy recovery ventilators? Are they really effective in our region since we have such a mild climate? Maybe you can talk more about both the cost and efficiency of them.
So I saw that actually, and I wasn't trying to dodge the question, but I don't have an exact number on the savings, but I can say that I do optimization of every design, and I have sensitivity analysis for that. And the biggest space conditioning load of these houses is the fresh air supply. So it makes a big, I guess the answer is a lot. It saves a lot of energy.
I can attest to that. I didn't get my home certified, but I built it to passive house methodology, and I basically haven't had to turn the AC on all summer. Because I night cool and close the windows and it's good to go. I
do in that study, I have that kind of data. I just don't have it off the top of my head. I also want to add, we've done a few projects in San Francisco, and one of them, the homeowner just turned his heat off and no one in his family noticed in winter.
Emily, we have a in-person question.
Thanks very much. I'm Janet Brunkhorst. I actually work in climate tech, and I have a question about the grid, which could be a huge topic, so I'm going to try to keep it contained. So we talked a little about the opportunity for bidirectional chargers and VPPs and things like that. I'm curious if there's an opportunity similarly with other types of energy management for other types of appliances in the home, adding devices, for example, so that utility companies can sort of manage that demand themselves. And I'm just curious if anybody's thinking about that for other types of appliances other than heat pumps and cars. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, I think the house itself becomes a battery when it's made efficient, and it's more than that. If you look at the response of a passive house to outdoor temperature swings during the day, it literally does not know night from day. It just sees an average temperature. So imagine if every home in California, I'm going to aim high, if every home in California was like that, they could heat and cool themselves at any hour of the day whenever they wanted. And after water heating, space conditioning is the typically second largest residential load.
And do you see, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add to that I believe someone from MCE is going to talk about their VPP program, and they are doing one in Richmond that's including other assets such as water heaters, potentially energy storage, and they might add some bidirectional vehicles as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Emily, any more questions online?
Yes. I'm trying to think of what could be a good one. Since I want to make sure we get to our break. Maybe one more for Emily. I think you just answered it, so it disappeared. Will there be any extra incentives for either low voltage, like 120 volt plug-in heat pump water heaters, or smaller size heat pump water heaters, or those with low global warming potential refrigerants? Or are all of the incentive levels the same?
Yeah, so of those things mentioned, only the low GWP refrigerant can get an extra incentive. So there's an additional 1,500 for products that have that and meet all the other requirements. For the 120-volt units, they are eligible, as are lower, smaller tank sizes, like mentioned, as long as they meet all other equipment requirements, but no extra incentives available for this.
Great. Well, I think that's all that haven't been answered either out loud or via typing. So again, check the Q&A for your responses if you asked a question, and I'll bring it back to the room.
Yeah, Barry, go ahead.
I had a question for Graham, and it kind of stems from, hey, Graham, good to see you. From your point a moment ago about what if everybody in California, how do we get all the homes in California to a particular threshold? And, you know, a challenge we have is a lot of people are planning or just are doing changes to their home over time rather than a gut rehab. Does your code analysis or any of your other work kind of inform what might be high value incremental steps as well? Or do you just, does that question unhelpful given what you've learned in terms of looking at the whole home as a system? In other words, is there a retrofit path that's implied by your work as well?
I did not examine it around that specific question, but I think that there would be clues in there. Yeah. I also think, you know, obviously you can't wave a wand and, you know, redo every house instantly, but there's just a huge lost opportunity in gut rehabs that are happening that aren't doing this, and particularly in new buildings that aren't doing this. And the rest of them can be upgraded over time, and there have been other studies around that for certain. Some of it's tricky, right? Some things require something else. Like if you go ahead and air seal to air seal the building effectively, you've got to air seal the entire building. You can't, you know, if you do one wall and leave the rest, it's minimally effective. But let's say you do air seal the building. Well, if you air seal the building, now you better have a ventilation system. So it can be done. It gets a little bit more complicated, but there are certainly paths to that place.
So I want to give us a little bit of time for it to take a quick break. I did have a question though. One hat that I wear is in marketing and outreach. And maybe this question is for John and Emily. You know, what I see potentially happening when you're talking about grid connectivity with your water heater and car is that essentially what you're asking people to do is share that resource with the larger grid. And I can already see the articles being written of, oh, they're going to turn off your water. You're not going to be able to use your car. So Emily, I know that for the SGIP heat pump water heater program, you need to opt into a DR, demand response program, in order to receive the incentive, which is, I think, a good way to do it. John, for V2X, what are the incentives, if any, financially for folks to participate beyond being a good grid citizen? And Emily, kind of same question, like how do you, go about thinking, or what is your thinking behind that potential pushback from the public?
I want to start, John. I see you're on mute, but.
I was asking if you want to go ahead, but I'll go ahead. Yeah. So, that's sort of yet to be determined. There are some programs with this from the CEC currently that allow for aggregation of assets, and they actually spell out the payback for them, and it's pretty substantial. There are some stationary battery VPP programs currently. There really aren't any quite yet for vehicles, but I'm sure they'll come. It's such a huge asset, it would be crazy not to utilize it. And as far as the question of having enough mileage done, that you can choose your own set point. You can say I need 50 miles tomorrow, don't discharge beyond, 45% or whatever the case might be for your situation. And that'll be programmed into the charger, so you don't have to think about it and go unplug it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. For the load shifting that has to be set up for each heat pump water heater, that doesn't involve any outside utility signals. It's just the manufacturer's own control logic. For the demand response enrollment requirement, customers can choose a program that they're comfortable with. Not all of those programs establish a direct connection with the technology. They can be in a program where they're just getting a text message and they choose what to do, such as OwnConnect, for example. But heat pump water heater load shifting programs are in the early kind of pilot stages, and the main priority is not sacrificing comfort. Unlike, a thermostat program where when you turn the temperature down, you might feel your house or up, you might feel your house changing. With a heat pump water heater, you should not feel any cold water. And that is absolutely the priority of these programs who are testing out those control strategies right now. And as I understand, Water Saver, for example, PG&E's program, which is in phase 2 of the pilot, has not had any customer complaints directly connected with the control strategies.
Great. Well, I want to give everybody, let's do around 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 11:02.